In this video, we're going to continue to find common percents of a number. So let's read the problem. Robert's parents are charging him 1% interest per month on a $250 loan. The loan is for 4 months. He wants to know how much he will be charged in interest over the 4-month period. So this is what he wants to know. So I'm going to highlight this. And here's some more given information. He starts by finding that 10% of 250 is $25. So remember we said 10% of a value is dividing it by 10, so we could also think of moving the decimal place one spot. So 10% of 250 is 25. Now we're asked to label the tick marks on the percent number line to indicate 1, 2, 3, and 4%. Then we're going to use the whole number line to determine the corresponding amounts of interest Robert will pay his parents. Okay, so we know that 10% of 250 corresponds to $25, and we want to find, this is broken into 10 equal pieces, so each one is 1%, 2%, 3%, and 4%. Okay, so he will pay 1% interest for the first month. So he's paying 1% every month, but this is telling us the percentage that's accumulating over the months. The second month he will have paid 2% of the total loan. Then the third month, 3% in total, and the fourth month. So at the end of the fourth month, he's paid 4%, 1% per month for 4 months, and this value will tell us how much interest he needs to pay his parents. And this type of interest is called simple interest. His parents are not charging him interest on his interest, which is what any bank would do, but they're just charging him 1% on the original amount. So now let's see what this corresponds to. Well, 25 is cut into 10 equal pieces, just like 10% was. So here, we didn't write this, but 10% divided into 10 equal pieces. Each tick mark was 1% more. And now if we take $25 and divide into 10 equal pieces, we get $2.50. Okay. So the first one is $2.50. The second one is $2.50 more than $2.50, or 2 times $2.50, which is $5. This would be $2.50 more, which is $7.50. Okay, these are all measured in dollars. And $2.50 more is $10. Okay, so for the first month, he'll pay $2.50 in interest. By the end of the second month, he would be paying $2.50 in interest twice, for each month, totaling $5. At the end of the third month, 3% in total interest, 3 copies of $2.50, which is $7.50. And the fourth month, he will pay a total of 4% interest, 1% interest per month for 4 months, which is $10. Let's look at the next one. Marissa works at a clothing store. They are having a sale. Each rack is labeled with the percentage off. Let's highlight this, percentage off for items on the rack. She needs to make a chart to show customers the corresponding dollar amount off for certain percentages off. And we want to fill in the chart below that Marissa is making for the customers. So let's look what's represented in the table. So notice on this side it's the percent off. So again, remember that percent off is different than percent of. The percent off is going to be the discount that's going to be subtracted off the total amount of the regular item price. And the percent off is 10%, 20%, 30%, or 40%. And she's making a chart for items where the regular price is $10, $20, $30, $40, and $50. Okay, so first let's complete the first row, 10% off each of these values. Remember, 10% off is 1/10, or we could think of dividing by 10. Which is $1 off. Okay, so again, 10% means 10 out of 100, which is equal to 1 out of 10, and finding 1/10 of something is equivalent to dividing by 10. So we have $1. Well, $20 is twice as much. So let's see what happens when we divide $20 by 10. We get a $2 discount. $30 divided by 10 gives us a $3 discount. Okay, notice this is equivalent to moving the decimal place one place to the left to find 10%. $40 at a 10% discount is $4. And finally, you probably guessed it by now, $50 at a 10% discount is $5. So now let's look at the next row. We want to find 20% off. Okay, so 20% off is 20 over 100, okay, or 2/10, okay, but it's not as just simple as dividing by 10. However, we can think of this as, let me write this over here, 2 copies of 10%. Okay, so it's 2/10 of the regular price, okay, is 20% off, and 20% is 2 copies of 10%. So we want 2 times $1 off, which will give us $2 off. Okay, and again, think of moving the decimal place 1 is $1, 20% is 2 times 10%, which is $2. Okay, this would be 2 copies of $2 off, which is $4. 2 copies of $3 off, which is $6. 2 copies of $4 off, which is $8. And finally, 20% off of 50 would be 2 copies of 10% or $5 off, which is a $10 discount. Okay, so I'm hoping you're starting to see the patterns here. Okay, so 20% off is 2 times as much off as 10% off. Notice this is corresponding to some original regular item price. So $20, 10% is $2, 20% is 2 times $2, which is $4. Now 30% off is 3 copies of 10%. Okay, so we can multiply the original 10% by 3. So we have 3 times $1, which is $3, 3 times $2, which is $6, 3 times $3, which is $9, 3 times $4, which is $12, and 3 times $5, which is $15 off. Okay, so again, just looking at this last one, if we wanted to find 30% off 50, we could find 10% by moving the decimal place 1 to the left. $5 is 10% off. 30% off is 3 times as much off as 10%, so 3 times 5 is 15. Now 40% off is 4 copies of 10%, or just to change things up a bit, it's also 2 copies of 20%. Okay, so we can think of either multiplying 4 times $1, which is what we did in every other case, and notice that's the same as 2 times $2. Okay, so here we'd have 2 times $4, so 2 copies of 20% is 40%. 2 copies of $6, just 20%, is 40%, so $12 off. 2 copies of $8 is 2 copies of 20%, which is $16 off. And finally, 2 copies of $10 is 2 copies of 20%, which is 40% off, which would be $20.